So welcome everyone. Let's talk about deciphering a solicitation for federal requirements. And as you can see from the alphabet soup right under our tagline, we're going to talk about a lot of items. This is a longer webinar. I will give us a break about halfway through. So hang in there. And again, ask those questions. Feel free to hit the raise hand. Let me know. We can engage in that discussion. So let's get started. Just real quick for anyone not familiar with us, the Alaska Apex Accelerator is one of 96 plus other accelerators across the US, Puerto Rico, and Guam. And we offer free assistance with all aspects of government contracting from cradle to grave, start to finish for federal, state, and local purchasing activity. The only reason I like to bring this up at the beginning, in case any of you are joining us from out of Anchorage or you work for a business that has a location outside of Anchorage, maybe have branch offices or subsidiaries elsewhere, I like to just point out our new association website where we launched it, gosh, I guess it was just this year, for the napex.us or the Department of Defense Office of Small Business Programs, the apexaccelerator.us /pound. Either one of these you can click on, and on those home pages you can find other locations other than the Alaska Apex. So while all of us kind of focus on and have that experience with federal contract, we're each experts on our state and local contracting opportunity as well. So if you're looking at doing business in Hawaii, because it's dark and cold in Alaska, and who doesn't think about Hawaii this time of the year, then reach out to the Apex in Hawaii and find out what opportunities they have going on. Also, each one of us often have different procurement fairs and opportunities because we have different contracting offices located within our region, and it gives us different opportunities for different events. So feel free to check out those websites. Look at multiple Apex accelerators, especially if you're looking at expanding into a new geographic region. All right, today's agenda. So a lot of things that we're going to go over. We're going to start with that acquisition terminology review. We're going to talk about acquisition methods and thresholds, acquisition types, contract types, and then we're going to dig into the uniform contract format, or UCF. We're going to go into the components of a solicitation, the need statement types, compliance requirements, the rules, the clauses and provisions, directions for proposal submittal. We're going to really kind of shine a spotlight on those instruction to bidders and evaluation award. And then we're going to go into proposal elements, the price, technical and administrative, and then building a bid matrix. All right, so acquisition terminology. It's defining that buying processes and pathways. And I apologize for the breaks in between. Drinking lots of water this morning, throat's just a touch tender. So talk about federal acquisition thresholds. So these are kind of the rule, the accessible up to easier, up to more complicated, into more the formalized protest. And they all have various dollar thresholds. So let's talk about micro purchases, because there's a lot of opportunity in that micro purchase realm. So the easiest thing to understand is a micro purchase isn't necessarily going to enter you into a contractual obligation. It is a buy on a credit card, or P card, it used to be termed, but it is a government credit card. The threshold, the limit is $10,000 for supplies, services, and constructions. Now, if you note the asterisk between after the services and construction, there's exceptions, of course, and these are for when wage determination kicks in, and I kind of have a better explanation on the next slide. So if it's a commercial supply buy, then an agency can do that through the purchase card for up to $10,000. And of course, there's exceptions for higher dollar amounts in different circumstances, and we'll kind of go into that in the next slide. Now, the one that most small businesses are the most accustomed to seeing or hearing about is that SAP, that Simplified Acquisition Procedure, SAT, Simplified Acquisition Threshold. So the simplified acquisition is often a more informal process, often is signaled by that request for a quotation, and its dollar value for the entirety of the contractual activity or potential contract activity based on that government estimate is under 250,000. I did see where they're proposing to increase that budget to 350,000. I believe it was proposed this year, but hasn't been finalized. So something to keep in mind that they're talking about increasing these dollar amounts. So under 250,000, they tend to be informal, but isn't necessarily always the case. Again, we have that simplified process, that SAP or SAT, different procedure or threshold, and they can use that for supplies, services, or constructions. And the guiding FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation, for this process for the simplified acquisition is FAR Part 13. You often see standard 418, 449, or KIPS. I lost my last, I'll have to figure that out, ignore the or. The commercial buy combined synopsis solicitation. Again, the threshold for this under that the commercial buy is 6.5 million. Again, tends to be more of an informal process. It can be formalized. The end result between that informal and formal is the contract type, purchase order, versus a contract, and also the obligation of the individual submitting the proposal of entering into a contract agreement. So in an informal setting, so if we have an RFQ and you are providing the agency the quote, it is an informal in the manner that when you sign your proposal package and you submit that, the agency can then accept to decide to award, and they then send you that purchase order signed, you sign it, and that begins acceptance. Then the legality, your offer is, you're on the hook, so to speak. Or if you sign, they sign, and you begin performance, the moment you begin performance of that, you again are accepting, and the legality is on the hook by beginning the performance. So in other words, if you, with an RFQ, that informal process, you submit your bid, something comes up, you realize you've made a great error, or stands under you need to pull that bid, you can do so without obligation. That's your informal RFQ. You've provided a quote. When you have your formal, which is what we start seeing under the sealed bid and negotiated acquisition, and they tend to, the more formalized, usually be above 250. Again, not always the case. This is just kind of generalities. Once you sign your proposal document and you submitted, if the government accepts your proposal, you're obligated. There is no backing out. Obviously, if there's something significant and you talk to the contracting officer, you explain that circumstances, they might release you, but they can also hold your feet to the fire and say, nope, this is what you bid, we've accepted, you now have to perform. So understanding those differences are important because it's a risk factor. And those risk factors are really going to come in when we're looking at, is the company going to financially benefit from completing this solicitation activity and gaining that award? So we're going to be talking about that a lot throughout this morning topic, not only learning how to read the solicitation, but looking at those potential risk factors and why it's important to look at the various components to make sure your company's putting the best foot forward. All right, kind of jumped ahead of myself, but let me get back here. So just again, acquisition thresholds. So we do have the commercial purchase, commercial buy, tends to have that ceiling cap of 6.5 million. Again, there's some exemptions dependent upon circumstance. Again, this was proposed to be in the document I read to, I believe it was going to up it to 7.5. And it can be informal or formal. Generally, it's an informal, ends in a purchase order. It can be supplies, services, and it's under FAR Part 12 or FAR Part 13. And we'll talk about these FAR parts and why it's kind of good to which guidance falls under which purchasing activity. We next have the sealed bid acquisition or an invitation for bid, IFB. They tend to be above 250,000. Again, these are kind of rough thresholds. It can have a sealed bid for under that amount, but you might see the government estimate tend to be above. It is a formal, there's a sealed bid process, as noted in the name. Price only is your comparison. That is it, the evaluation factor. There's other factors for reasonableness and responsibility of the part of the proposer, the company that submitted the proposal, but really that whole everything lies on price, lowest price. It has a public bid opening where anyone that has an interest in the solicitation activity, you've put in a bid, you've are one of the subcontractors involved and you've submitted a bid to a prime that's included in their bid, then you can sit in on those public bid openings. They often will have a bid synopsis that's released, whole different process than the next one over, which is that negotiated business. So again, supply, service, construction, and all of its guidance is defined under FAR Part 14. The last one and the most common for solicitation activity types is the negotiated acquisition. When it's formal, we'll see a request for proposal. You might even see something that's a negotiated acquisition that's still going to have that request for a quote, but generally you're looking at a more formal. It can be above that 250,000. Again, these are just kind of benchmarks for understanding these thresholds. It's a negotiated contract. Unlike the sealed bid, where your price is open for everyone to see, negotiated means that the federal agency can enter into negotiations with one or more of those potential bidders that have been in that evaluation acceptance, and there can be multiple rounds. It can be depending on the complexity of the solicitation, but the government has the right to enter into negotiations with one or more of those offers. It can be for supplies, services, or construction, and the guiding FAR for that is FAR Part 15. All right, so just a little bit on micro purchase exceptions. So I just wanted to make it a little clearer. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We can see for construction, the cap is 2,000 because we have the federal requirement for wage rate, wage determinations that kick in at that $2,000 benchmark. And for construction, we often see that as that Davis-Bacon, and so that anything over 2,000 for construction or construction related activity, once it hits that dollar threshold, those wage determinations kick in. Other federal law, you can see defined here, kicks in. So often if it's a construction activity, that micro purchase is going to always stay at 2,000 unless that dollar amount tied to that Davis-Bacon Act, the Construction Act for the wage determination is increased. For services, we have the same thing where the wage determination is the Service Contract Labor Standards or the Service Contract Act. So that cap then is 2,500. So the moment that those wage determinations are applicable for that activity, then those dollar amounts kick in and it's established. Now, just I wanted to let you know, because sometimes you do see these crazy dollar amounts that are paid for by credit card, and there are contingency operations kind of continues to define it. In that case, they can go 20,000 or 35,000 outside of the US, 20 inside, but there's also a few other. So there are times when Secretary of State or the administrator of the agency has determined emergency situation, they can go ahead and go over that $10,000 mark. All right, So let's talk about solicitation terminology. And we're going to see these when we get into contract opportunities on the SAM website, and it's good to kind of understand what they are. So we have a pre-solicitation notice, which is just that, an advance notice that a solicitation is forthcoming. Is posted, and this is just rough guidance pulled from the FAR, 15 days prior to the solicitation being available. Dependent upon the complexity of the solicitation package, it might be as many, it posted as far as 30 or even 60 days in advance to allow those businesses, to allow industry to start pulling their contracting team together. So the more complex the activity, generally the longer the notice that you're going to get. Often you might see a pre-solicitation notice posted where they're saying, hey, industry day. We are going to have an event, but first we're going to start with an industry discussion. And then we might have a draft solicitation posted. But just that pre-solicitation notice is, again, agency communicating with industry that there is an intent to release a solicitation, and they're giving you an advance notice so that you can prepare your team. We have the actual solicitation document. This is an announcement of government procurement and government intent procure. Solicitation documents are added as attachments. We have the combined synopsis solicitation. This is an informal or formal. These two kind of tend to blend when a contracting officer decides which notification type that they're using. It really's changed a lot from the old Fed Biz Ops, where it used to be more cut and dry, but the combined synopsis solicitation look a lot more like a solicitation, vice versa. And we'll go into that. But the combined synopsis solicitations, that again could be an informal or formal solicitation used for commercial items or buys, complete scope of work or specification can be provided in the announcement, which is called the synopsis. So when you're looking at SAM and you have just that white screen and the the text as you're scrolling down through that website, that's the synopsis. Solicitation copy may be provided, documents may be attached, but in a combined synopsis solicitation, especially if it's a very simplified acquisition in complexity, not necessarily threshold, but just it's a very straightforward. We are buying 12 sets of snowshoes. Here's our information. All of that can be posted right within the synopsis. We're seeing trend usually has something attached, maybe a price sheet or something along those lines. But the meat and potatoes of that, so to speak, is the bulk of the information is posted in the synopsis. Response time 10 to 30 days. We'll see. The interesting thing with response time, again, the more complex the solicitation, the longer they're going to give you to pull that bid package together. But as we get towards the end of the federal fiscal year, we might see things with a very quick turnaround, even as far as much or as little as 2 days, just because the agency is out of time, or if there is an urgency of need, we can see that under 10 to 30 days for that response time. Sources sought. This is where agency is reaching out to industry saying, hey, we want you to talk to us. It is used for a gathering of information, market research. So one agency is saying, we have a need and maybe we're not quite sure how to meet this need. Therefore, we want industry to reach out to us. Give us your contact info, give us your social economic data, give us those things so that, again, part of that market research, we can determine which path we are going to go about, which type of set aside we might use. Small business or one of the subsets, the woman-owned 8A, service disabled veteran hub zone. So again, agency is asking you to talk to them, sources sought. Sometimes it also could be a request for information, which is that RFI, but it's still a sources sought type of notice. No solicitation is available. There might be a draft solicitation to kind of begin that discussion with industry of what the agency is thinking about doing, but it is not necessarily finalized. Sources sought not always guarantee that there is going to be an actual solicitation issued. It depends where the agency is at in their planning process and in that availability of funds. So it's always critically important that industry respond to sources sought because that data is utilized and it is involved. It may be that the activity is coming out within a year. Again, we're talking complexity, or it's a whole new concept that the agency is trying to develop. They need industry to start talking to. Sources sought are critical. I would say at least half the sources sought, and that's a really rough guess, may result in then a pre-solicitation notice into a solicitation, and we get that, hey, this is our communication cycle. It just depends. Are they gathering information or are they doing it more as a market research? The sources sought will give you the information of what they want you to respond with and what the agency intends. The downside of sources sought is if you submit paper your package, submit your statement of qualifications, uh, send that information. The agency is not required to respond to a sources sought. Again, they're gathering information. Critical part, especially in that small business set aside realm. A special notice is just that, to use for information purposes only. Could be a source sought, could be announcement of an industry day. It could be the agency is just posting their procurement forecast for the new fiscal year and they want to get that information out. It could be the intent to award a sole source. I was going through the SAM activity, what was posted right now for place of performance for Alaska, and there were quite a few announcements, special notices where the agency intends to award a sole source. They post it out there, it sits there for 10 days. If you should have been given an opportunity to bid, if it's something that you could have provided, you have a response to reach out to the industry, to the agency, and maybe they will change that from a sole source into a competitive action. Again, depends on circumstance. So again, agency pushing information forward or inviting you to respond, such as the case of a sources sought. We have award notices. Again, just that, notice of award, information pertaining to the award above 3.5 million. There's exceptions. Awards are posted on formal solicitations and all ARA funded projects. So that's ARA's old terminology, still there in writing. So award notification. Cancellation notice, anything posted can be canceled due to change of plans or just availability of funds. And amendment is a changes to a pre-solicitation or solicitation. So if an agency posted a pre-solicitation to say, hey, heads up, they may amend that announcement with the actual solicitation, amend and include the solicitation. Doing it that way keeps that activity number the same. Sometimes you lose continuity where a pre-solicitation notice might have had a solicitation number assigned, and then when they actually issue the solicitation, that number might change. You might lose that continuity for announcements. Or once the solicitation is actually posted, if they need to change the solicitation documents, add additional information, add the question and answers that have been gathered from the solicitation activity, again, those are all posted to amendment. Solicitations are amended, contracts are modified. All right, so let's talk federal contract types. And the reason that this is important to understand when you're looking at a solicitation, and we're looking for language that the agency intends to award a fixed price or a firm fixed price or some sort of cost reimbursement. The contract type is really about the sharing of risk between agency and industry. So when we think about it from that direction, when we start with that firm fixed price, and we think of this as a sliding scale, you know, top to bottom, when we have these fixed price or firm fixed price, or even a firm fixed price with an economic price adjustment, the risk is going to be on the part of industry. You are submitting your bid and you are saying, this is a lump sum purchase. And the price sheets, the price schedules attached with the solicitation may vary, but it might just be one item, one thing, and you're just giving us all the prices rolled together. Or maybe it'll have a price and a line for freight. It doesn't go into those price component details as much. If we have option years, then yeah, we might have that firm fixed price per option. Generally, again, the responsibility falls on industry, on the individual submitting that quote, submitting that proposal. If you, that fixed price, that's it. If you made an error in your cost estimation and the error is completely in-house, it wasn't due to some sort of unforeseen site conditions, changes in generated from the request changed, it was a government generated change, contract change, where we have a cost modification that might kick in. The responsibility falls on that proposer, on the individual providing that quote, that you know your price, you know that, and that's it. If you made errors and you're coming in and it's more expensive, then you're going to eat that difference because the price is the price. There's always exceptions, there's always opportunity to negotiate that depending upon circumstance. But a firm fixed price, lump sum, sometimes you'll see that language, lump sum for fixed price, the responsibility lies on the individual submitting that proposal, submitting that bid. Just that one price for entire statement of work, usually one item for cost, schedule used when acquiring commercial items or supplies or services on the basis of a reasonably definite, functional, and detailed requirements, or detailed. Under a fixed price contract, the contractor guarantees performance and must perform within the ceiling price. That's it. Final price to the government is either fixed at the outset or subject to some of the same contingencies. If you were able to improvise or improve your process and you come in and you were able to complete the activity and you come under your estimated amount, it is a lump sum. Congratulations, your profit margin is higher. You bill the entirety of the contractual price. It's kind of frustrating, believe it or not, for agency and businesses that get their first contracts. They find out, oh, you know, what was the supply? It came in $500 less. I want the agency to really like me. I'm going to invoice for that cost less that $500. Then, of course, it requires the agency to go through that deobligation. But that isn't really what the agency wants you to do. If you've bid it for $200,000, fabulous. If you were able to do that work and it come in under that amount, they still want you to bill that firm fixed price. That is what was budgeted. That was what was obligated to the contract. If it goes over, again, you can have discussions with the contracting officer, but that responsibility, again, falls on you. And the agency can say, well, you bid that. We are not adjusting that price. So that is that risk factor when you're thinking about that for the type of contract. Now, when we have a fixed price with economic price adjustment, it has a identified condition that allows for volatile price increase or decreases that's beyond the contractor's control. So the most common where you see that is for fuel purchases or a component where there's a high demand on these components and the market itself, especially on a global scale, the price changes rapidly. So fuel has that rack rate, and an economic price adjustment is usually going to have a plus or minus, say 4% or 5%. And if the price increases within that allowed EPA, then you can go ahead and bill. The agency will adjust. They can modify the contract to cover for that increase in price. However, if the price drops below that margin, 5% cheaper, or, you know, we have a 5% plus or minus 5%, and that fuel drops, so it's 10% cheaper, then yes, the agency has the right to come back and ask you to reduce your costs and to deobligate, to pull those funds. So it is meant to protect both the agency and the buyer, and it helps share the risk for, again, volatile price. If you are pricing a bid component and the industry does have a thing, if you remember after Katrina and all of the hurricanes, and gosh, all of the natural disasters that we're having now, building materials suddenly become in demand. And I remember, after Katrina, that the demand for aluminum was in such great demand that manufacturers, even just providing raw material, couldn't guarantee their price beyond a 10-day window. The supplies were just, again, volatile. They didn't know. So in that case, if you're dealing with that or a condition, we ran into that for components after the pandemic, where the manufacturing demand was greater than that supply, and it impacted that price. There was a volatility of the price. If there's ever a case like that, during the solicitation phase, you can ask the contracting officer, the contract specialist, hey, would you consider some sort of economic price adjustment for this particular component of this activity? And here's why we're asking. You do need to do that during the solicitation phase. Once a contract's issued, especially since it's fixed price, you're locking yourself into that. All right, the next time, so we kind of have these fixed price, and then we get into some sort of cost reimbursement. We have time and material or labor hour contracts, and these really are just that cost reimbursement. You're going to bill your actual plus whatever the overhead and fee that you negotiate. So the type of cost contracts. Time and material usually have just that not to exceed labor hours or fixed material cost line items. Oh, excuse me, 1 second. All right, sorry, I tried so hard not to make throat clearing noises in the mic. That's just horrible to listen to. All right, so time and material or labor hours. So again, not to exceed labor hours, fixed material cost items. Contractor bills exact hours spent, materials costs are a pass-through plus overhead and fee. These contracts are used only when it is not possible at the time of placing the contract to estimate accurately the extent or duration of the work or to anticipate costs with any reasonable degree of confidence. It includes a contract ceiling price that the contractor exceeds at its own risk. So these are what they call a best faith offer, where we've set a ceiling and the agency is asking the industry to do their best faith, make a best faith effort to perform within those limitations. Usually the solicitation has reporting mechanism to note when you are at a certain specific burn rate, and then they can decide. So when I say that it's undefined, so think research and development. If they have an activity where they're building something new and there's really no industry standard that it's been defined of, oh, yep, like taking your car into an auto mechanic, their price sheets, they say, you need a new transmission, it's going to be X hours. It has been defined, it's been documented, it's something that can be anticipated. But if you have an unknown end result and we're in that process of building, then that's when government is sharing that responsibility, or that, not responsibility, I apologize, sharing the risk with the unknown factor by allowing those cost reimbursements. We have cost contracts then. Again, under a cost reimbursement contract, the contractor merely agrees to exert its best effort to perform within the estimated cost. Actual costs incurred are subject to audit. All allowable costs are reimbursed. Then, depending on the complexity and the uncertainty of the risk of being able to perform that end objective, then they start adding incentive fees. So cost plus fixed fees, cost plus incentive fees. Cost reimbursement contract that provides payment to the contractor, a negotiated fee that is fixed at the inception of the contract. So these are incentives to do your best effort to maintain costs, to perform within a reasonable, and if you are hitting those benchmarks, then you can, at different I've seen both fixed fees and incentive fees. Fixed fees are are fixed, just that, an exception, incentive fees, or for hitting goal marks and certain addition. Again, the incentive is with the cost contract, and when we start getting into the unknown, then the agency is picking up a lot more of that risk compared to industry because it's got kind of that open-ended billing potential. We don't know, we can't easily define how we're going to get there. We're just trying to get to an end mean. And again, you might see that research and development is just a great example for that, but not necessarily the end all be all where you're going to see cost contracts. So again, firm fixed price, all of that risk is really falling on you, industry, when you're bidding your price. But as we start getting into some sort of reimbursable cost concept, time and material, cost contracts, then the agency is now starting to absorb more and more of that risk that the industry really is performing at their best effort level and are doing their best to keep those costs under control. All right, so let's talk about understanding the regulations. So the Federal Acquisition Regulation, establishes guidance that is there to protect both the agency and industry. It tells the contracting, again, it's providing that legal guidance for the contracting officer of how they are going to go about spending federal dollars and committing the government to pay for goods or services. And so depending on the complexity, and we kind of saw that from those different thresholds, we have the FAR parts that guide for that particular activity. Now, these aren't all of them, but these are the ones that we use most frequently when we really get heavily involved into the contracting industry. All right, so I'm just going to quick double check. Any questions, anybody? Okay, question on. Again, if you guys have questions, feel free to raise your hand if you don't feel like typing, or get those in the box, because we want to keep those discussions going. Okay, so the most used FAR parts, part 1 is really, well, let's start here. Part 2, definitions of words and terms. Part 8, required sources of supplies and services. Part 9, contractor qualifications. That kind of gets into that determining reasonableness. Part 12, so we kind of started to see these right here when we were looking at the different solicitation types, acquisition of commercial products, commercial services. 13 is simplified acquisition procedures, SAP. Part 14 is sealed bidding. 15 is negotiation by contracting by negotiation. 16 talks about the different types of contracts. So if you're looking at a potential cost-based contract, Part 16 is really going to define those parameters and define those expectations of performance and limitation for risk. So if you are looking in that, entering into that world, read FAR Part 16 for those types of contracts. Part 19, for all of us that are small business and looking at set-asides, this one is on, and people probably know the best. This is where these small business set-aside programs are defined. Law creates them, and then they're entered into procurement world under FAR Part 19. So you want to know, what is a hub zone? Can a hub zone certified business get a sole source contract? It's going to tell you here, Part 19, small business programs. And of course, Part 52 is the clauses and provisions. So this is where you start seeing those clauses incorporated in full or by reference, and they start out 52 point something. So that's all Part 52. So again, there's things in between. If you're ever curious and you just want to look at it, this link right here will take you right to the index where you can see all the various FAR parts. But as you're looking at these different things in a solicitation, you can go and read those different FAR parts to give yourself that completeness for understanding what is that process. All right. So, Code of Federal Regulations. So the Federal Acquisition Regulations, again, are those guidelines. Yes, they do have laws. They are that legal realm under which federal dollars are going to be spent, under how the government will be obligated to pay, and those intent is out there. It's contracting officers shall or should consider, or here's the process, but it also has that information. It gives that legal structure under which we're going to perform. Those protections are in place for, again, for both agency and contractor. But when we're looking at how is law created, we have the Code of Federal Regulations. And I shouldn't say how is it created, but once it is in place. So the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, and we especially are entering a new interesting era with the change of administration. This is where we might see those executive orders, those presidential executive orders being signed. Those go into law upon signature. They're entered into the into the CFR, and then the FAR gradually catches up to implementing that language that law has created. So if we have a change in that executive order, it's an absolute, it is law. Often agencies might have circulars that cover that requirements of implementing those law in that procurement activity until the FAR Council can get around into codifying the language and establishing the language that the guidance to implement this new law is in place. So sometimes you might see something, especially executive orders, those EOs are great examples that kick in immediately. But if you're looking for more information, you can actually go to this website, the ecfr.gov, and here, as you can see, you can come in and view changes. So if we have something that's proposed, you can see that as well, where it's passing, but once that has been adopted in law, you can see that information. All right, other agency subpart acquisition regulations. So we talked about the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation, but we also have a sub-regulation for each agency. And these are just a few. It's kind of great to look at them. Some of the acronyms really crack me up, but they can add additional definition. They can't counter the FAR, so you have that level of hierarchy. So that Code of Federal Regulation, the FAR, and then the sub-FAR, like Department of Defense, has the DFARs. And you'll see those clauses where the FAR has 52 point something, well, the DFAR is going to be 252 DAT. And that's going to say when you see a 3-digit for that prefix of the clause number, if it's anything other than 52, again, 252, 452, that is an indicator that there's a sub-agency acquisition regulation that is being kicked in. Again, these are to further define, further regulate, further provide instruction, etc., that activity. And it cannot conflict with the FAR or the Code of Federal Regulations. So again, we have a link here for each of the different agencies. So AGAR, Agriculture, HSAR, Homeland Security, like DEER, Department of Energy, DIAR, Interior, Department of Interior, Acquisition Regulations, JAR for Justice, but again, maybe it's just me and my sense of humor. I like the HSAR, the Health and Human Services. I do. I have no excuse for myself, but I do find some of the acronyms kind of amusing. The exception to the realm of the federal acquisition is AMS. So FAA has its own procurement regulations, and it's just acquisition management system. So AMS, FAA, here's the link for that. Their intent and legal guidance and requirements to obligate FAA as an agency, it has its own guidance, but they mirrors the FAR in intent and how it's structured. But if you are looking at contract opportunities with FAA, if you're looking for those FAR clauses and codes, again, they have their AMS, Acquisition Management System. And I do have a link here if you want to see a look at that. Again, the intent is the same. The AMS, it cannot conflict with the CFR, those codes of federal regulations, or the USC codes, United States Code. Again, hierarchy of legal requirements. So if you're looking for just anything other than FAA, here's the link here, homepage, and you can go through and take. It's a great website. It's really interesting to access whichever ones that you're looking for from the beginning. So if you're doing a lot of work with the Forest Service, which falls under the Department of Agriculture, yeah, you might want to look at what areas are they pulling out for additional concerns for their agency. Okay, so let's talk about clauses versus provision. And again, this is that FAR Part 52. So we can see here in this example, this gratuities 52203-3. This is the clause. So it's the law statute that applied to the contract action. It's going to have the title. Usually it's going to have, as prescribed, it's going to have a date that it was updated, and it's going to have, here it is, and we have an indicator that this clause is complete. So end of clause. Now, I will be honest, this is an older screenshot. I haven't looked to see if April of '84 is the most current with gratuities. This one's pretty solid. Right, a contract to proceed may be terminated by written notice if after notice and hearing the agency head or designee determines that the contractor offered or gave gratuity to influence, that intended to influence the award decision. So again, clause. This is just a great example. This is also a boilerplate clause. That means it's in absolutely every solicitation activity. It's a mandatory clause. So here's just a great example that I found when looking at solicitations last night, is where we have the FAR and sub-FAR. And again, you can see it's AGAR, so this is Department of Agriculture. This was from a Forest Service solicitation, and this is right out of their document. So we had the FAR 52-252, authorized deviation and clauses, and right underneath it, we had the AGAR 452-20470. So again, the sub-agency mirrors so we could actually look at 52-204 to modify for contract closeout, and then here's the 452 means the agency is further defining what that process means. So the clauses for a sub-agency do mirror the FAR clauses. They are just further specific directions. Upon contract closeout, utilizing SAP according to FAR 13, unobligated funds, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So provisions, on the other hand, are often tied to proposal, but the biggest difference is the original provision has a blank line. Something is supposed to be filled in either by the individual that is proposing or by the contracting officer, and there will actually be directions. So like this, certification for independent price determination. Again, this is an older screenshot. I didn't check to see if it's been updated since April of 1985, but it says the offer certifies that. And you can see down here, and it has, this is for the individual preparing the proposal, that they are certifying, has been authorized. E-signature on the line is considered to be certification by the signatory that the signatory did these things. They are submitting that. If you're seeing provisions within the solicitation document, those are either required to be provided, such as in the certification of pricing, Truth in Negotiation Act, the TINA, anything along that line where they're certified, that might be required to be submitted either with the proposal or post-award. But often these are tied to proposal requirements. We have seen them, and the most common is get into some of the commercial activities and the clauses there where there's a whole list of FAR clauses and there's a little line in front of each one. In that case, the contracting officer those are still the clauses, but even though there's a blank line, the contracting officer then is required to complete that information. But in these provisions, as noted, it actually has direction. Insert name, person, that offers, organization responsible for determining prices. So you do want to pay attention of when you have something that is to be completed, when is that due? Is that part of the proposal, or is that something that's required post-award? The most common provision is the reps certs that we complete in SAM. Those are often still, that FAR clause is still provided in full, and I do have an example in the solicitation. But even though we do that as part of the SAM registration, that again, that provision where it has information, the nice thing with the SAM is it's allowing you to complete that prior to the solicitation. All right. Phew, it's been an hour. Questions, anybody? It's a long review of, but getting that baseline terminology sources of where do we look things up if we see those references. All right, so let's talk about the uniform contract format. Yeah. And as soon as we go through this, then we'll get a break in there. So we could either take a break now, or if you guys want to keep going, we're at that hour marker. Any bids? Anybody need a 5-minute break now? Raise a hand. Okay, well, let's keep moving forward. So the reason that I have developed this webinar where this is where I use as an education mechanism, because even if your world is under the SAP, that simplified acquisition, you're looking at smaller dollar amount contracts, that is your wheelhouse. That's where you want to be as your business decision. The understanding the formal aspect of how a solicitation is put together really gives you confidence to say, hey, something is missing in this bid packet, in my solicitation. I should have information, and even though the solicitation is not formalized, where it's broken down into these various parts and subsections, that information is still critical to being able to put together a complete bid. And if you understand how a larger formalized solicitation is built, that gives you that confidence to say something is missing. I am missing data. I don't feel good putting a price proposal together, complete my quote, because I am missing information. So understanding how this is built, we can then take this concept of these different components and apply it when we're looking at a combined synopsis solicitation, or we're looking at something that doesn't use this formalized component to say, hey, these factors should be in and I don't see them. What am I missing? So we're going to talk about all of these. The uniform contract format, again, it identifies, and there's a few that maybe on the simplified acquisition, but this intent and this type of information should be provided in each solicitation activity. So let's go ahead and get started. So part A, and if you look here, it is the actual solicitation or the contract form. And the biggest difference between a combined synopsis solicitation is we might not actually have a form starting the document. So I just have examples of the two. This standard form 33, solicitation offer award, and you can see I've got better screenshots here where it actually has the part numbers, just as we see spelled out here. And there's an actual little X in front of each, letting you know which areas are used. So in this example, they don't have a description spec work statement, although that should be in everything. So in fact, that's not checked, is definitely an error in older screenshot. But when we are completing our proposal, there are components when there's a form that we need to fill out as part of that proposal. And so it kind of talks about it here. So box 3 is the solicitation number, 4 is the type, is an RFP, request for proposal, RFQ, date issued, issued by, bid due date, time, agency contact info, table of contents. These here where I have it in red, this is to be offer, is to be completed by the offerer. Offer due, good for how many days, payment terms, amendments, acknowledgement of amendments, 15 through 18 is the offerer information. So let me get to an easier. So again, this is one I've just pulled from last night when updating, and it's just bigger. It's a little easier to see the top half of the form. Again, you can see that they've grabbed and said, this is what is available within the entirety of the package. We can see the solicitation number. We can see the bid due date. And here it says sealed offers in original and 1 copy. to be provided. Doesn't mean it's a sealed bid. It's just sealed offer. Copy furnished, be received. Here's our bid due date and time. The contracting officer, the information. This is again for information for for agency. And here's our section. Here's the pages that we can find these various sections. The bottom half of that same document where it says offer must be completed by offerer, and that's kind of what I had here in red. Again, just to kind of make it a little easier to see. Are we offering a discount? How good is these 60 days unless a different period is inserted by offer? There might have been something in the solicitation that required for a 90-day that your offer remained valid for 90 days. 60-day, they use this form, 60 days is the default. If you have a component in your price where even trying to keep it for 30 days is challenging, then again, you want to ask questions to the contracting officer prior to the bid due date to let them know that there are components that are challenging on an industry, on a national level, to keep those prices firm for, because if the manufacturer won't guarantee a price for 30 days, why do you want to carry that risk or won't guarantee it for 60 days? So again, item right here, if we challenge that 60 days, ask those questions. Are we offering a discount for prompt payment? Maybe you have a 2% if paid within 10 days, etc. Acknowledgement of amendments. And on the amendment form, it has a checkbox. The offerer shall acknowledge or does not need to acknowledge. So here's the way you can list the amendments, the date, the number, etc. It's 2 columns, so you can do 4 on this page, your contact, etc. All right. The other form that's often used is this 1442. It's kind of a 2-page form. I know it might be harder to see. Again, I just pulled this right off the Forest Service, their construction MATOC. But again, still the same concept. What's the biggest difference in this form is it doesn't have that formalized, here are the parts of the solicitation that, and here's the page numbers. And you can have sometimes this here, 10, the government requires performance work described in these documents. You might have a price component listed here, or they say see such and such for. So this just might be a synopsis. And you can see offers must respond as described, sections L and M. Okay, so it's still using that same type of concept, they just used a different form. So L and M here, instructions, conditions, notice to offer, and evaluation. Okay. So those were part A. Part B is the supply or service price schedule. This is something created by the agency. And each solicitation, unless, because there's always the exception, if it's a combined synopsis, they might not have a price schedule. They just say, hey, we need this. And then you have that 52212-1 with instructions for offers for commercial products. And that tells you in that FAR clause, how are you putting a price sheet together? So other than that exception, the agency, there should be some sort of price sheet where the agency is letting you know how do they want their prices provided so that for comparison purposes, they can actually compare every proposal, every quote equally. It's been defined, how are we breaking it out? If we have option years, we might have, see how this is the 101 through 105. If there were several option years, we might see this duplicated and it start at 201 or 301 to indicate the option years. But when you have this section B, these price schedules, or schedule of cost or bid schedule, you always use the actual format of the schedule that's included in the solicitation. So if you're new to the contracting realm and used to providing a quote to your commercial clients, that's not how it works on the agency side. So even if you provide your quote, the agency is not going to sign your quote. They're going to provide you with a solicitation documentation that you then sign. Because often quotes have terms and conditions, that little fine print at the bottom, and the agency is not going to accept anything outside of the FAR, and they're not going to sign those requests for quotes. You might provide them to program staff as they're using that for building cost estimates. They may ask you to give a quote form. but that's not going to be rolled into the contract. So there should be a price sheet. And again, this is how the agency wants to be able to look at this so that they can use the same comparison process for looking at all of those bids or proposals. And carefully read all of the directions under section B. Sometimes there's optional. Sometimes it says price for the things that you are going to provide. So if it is just in essence a large shopping list of stuff, of commodities, there might be optional. You can only bid on what you want to provide. So if there's 200 things listed, but you guys are a specialty and you can only provide 100 of those, fantastic. Read the price sheet. If that is the case, it'll say price the line items that you're interested in providing. It might say that it's required to provide pricing for all line items. Again, read those directions that are on those price sheets. Part C, scope of work, statement of work, performance work statement, or statement of objectives, the SOO. So that statement of work, and that's just kind of the generalized title, is a formal document that captures and defines the work activities, deliverables, timeline a vendor will execute against performance of a specified work for the client, for the agency. So these scope of work, statement of work, performance work statement, kind of, they provide a description, performance parameters, the purpose of the solicitation activity of the agency's need. The listing of requirements can include labor, materials, equipment requirements, applicable standards, acceptable criteria, timelines, due date, deliverables, period of performance. And here this last describes need, but not always the process to meet the need. And that's where we start getting into the difference between what they call, I just dropped the words, a requirements versus a performance, that statement of objectives. So generally a scope of work is considered to be a performance statement. It's telling you what to do, how to do it, when to do it. It's prescriptive. There's the word I was looking for. It's a prescriptive document. It says if you are to mow the lawn, that you're going to cut the grass every time the grass reaches a height of more than 2 inches. That the grass should be cut to 1.5 inches. How frequent depends on, I don't know, rain, sunshine, factors, but it's telling you what to do, when to do, and it's very specific. Now, this is another risk factor. When you have a very prescriptive statement of work, the agency is telling you what they want you to do, and you are to follow their parameters, and you're pricing accordingly. And if you have a statement of work and it turns out the prescriptive activity doesn't work as prescribed, well, the responsibility falls back on that government of, hey, we are doing exactly what you told us to do. We priced accordingly, and now we're finding errors in conflict on this performance, but we're doing what you said. And if we're looking at changes in that performance, we're kind of opening ourselves for negotiation because we're now changing the contract. You gave very prescriptive, you told us how to do it, when to do it, the timeliness, all of those factors. It's very set up. If you're really curious of great examples, look at old mill specs where on a tutorial that were like 20 pages that actually, gave directions of wipe down the mirror from left to right in a circular motion. Very prescriptive. When you get into performance work statements or statement objectives, this is where the end objective, those end items, the goals, the need that needs to be met, and they're going to identify goals and levels of acceptance and when are you the criteria for acceptance. So if we do a call center, we might have goals that calls should be answered no more than 2 minutes apart. So if somebody's on hold, they shouldn't be on hold for more than 2 minutes. Or if a message is left, messages are responded to within an hour. Those levels of performance, those acceptable criteria are defined. And in the case of these statement of work, performance work statement, or I'm sorry, performance work statement or statement of objectives, it's up to industry to say in their technical component, this is the process, this is how we're going to do it, this is how we're defining, this is what we are proposing that we will do for our call center, for our technical component, for our engineering design. They are, you, the bidder, are saying, here's how we're going to do it. Here's our benchmarks. Here's the information. Here's how we'll meet those acceptable criteria. Here's how we measure that we're meeting those acceptable criteria factors. So again, this is not a prescriptive, it's objective, and the responsibility and that risk component again falls on industry, because you are the ones telling the agency how you're going to do it. This is how we propose in that technical proposal of meeting that agency need. Again, scope of work, statement of work, it's prescriptive. They're going to tell you what to do, when to do it. When you get into that other end, where you are proposing that process and then you are giving those guidance for measuring. How do you know that you're meeting those end objectives? All right, section D, packaging and marketing and marking. Now I'm going to kind of fly through these next ones because I'm just going to note here, section can be used for both packaging and solicitation, or referred to the packaging of the deliverables. So depending on formalizing, these are just some examples. Packing materials be such, prevent materials from becoming separated, et cetera, et cetera. All right, section E, inspection and acceptance. Note, this section may have requirements that impact cost proposal and most definitely have areas to address in the technical. So again, clauses related to an example, inspection of services, inspection of research and development, responsibility for supplies. The government has an obligation to inspect and accept before you are going to pay, whether it's deliverable is an actual component, or it is a report, or it is monthly performance. There is somebody that is accepting that level of performance. They're inspecting for, is it meeting what is set out within that contract, and acceptance of those services, acceptance of those products, those goods, and then move forward. Pay attention to that depending on what it is, but that inspection and acceptance is very critical. Deliveries and performance. Often we have factors that impact this, such as in construction, we have liquidated damages, stop work order, government delay. Those all fall under deliveries or performance. Deliveries may be something as simple as, we see here, this AGAR again, performance contract from date of award through such and such date. You have 2 years to complete that activity. So in a formalized, this is where that's going to be defined, that section F, deliveries or performance. You might see it in the need statement, whether it's a scope of work or statement of objectives, where they have anticipated completion by, but there should be some language in absolutely every solicitation of when is your deadline for completion. Contract administration data can vary, again, depending on the activity, but anytime that there is forming of. So the assignment of a contracting officer representative or a technical representative, invoice and payment. If you're doing business with Department of Defense, they are going to have a wide area workflow component in that section G, that contract administration data. A lot of the civilian agencies are using IPP. There is language in there saying this is how you're going to invoice, contract administration, monthly progress payments. If you have a services contract, again, is there progress payments where you can bill upon scales of completion? Government furnished property, post-award conference, subcontractor notification, key personnel requirements. Again, different things that you might see. Now, you may not have a formalized, but even a janitorial for that purchase order, you want to see something for that contract administration that has a clause for progress payments. The government doesn't pay you until something is complete or delivered in full unless there is a clause allowing progress payments. They're going to break that down into billable time components or completion points. All right. Part H, special contract requirements, source code for software. Again, these are just examples that I pulled. Security requirements for unclassified. We might start seeing this under CMMC, the cybersecurity model maturity information requirements for performance, so special contract requirements. They might have something in formalized where they're saying key personnel, that the government gets to approve key personnel before you begin performance. That might be an example special contract. Again, pay attention to this component. Here is part 2, section I. We get into our contract clauses, and you can see this example incorporated by reference, where it's just the number in the title, and absolutely these are impacted. And you should get at least read all of these, every single clause, all the way through until you get to know the boilerplate clauses well. Just because they're incorporated in reference doesn't mean they are optional. Part 3, section J, the list of documents, exhibits, other attachments will be included in contract. It could be a wage determination or collective bargaining agreement if there's a union. Drawings, floor plans, maps, photos, experience capability questionnaires, glossary of terms, additional supporting documents, government reports, lists of government furnished property. Absolutely, there should be some sort of attachment. Unless it's a very simplistic buy, there should be some sort of attachment that is giving you that information that you need. If it is construction or a service, absolutely, there should be a wage determination or that CBA document attached for any time over that 2,000 for construction or 2,500. There should always be a wage determination attached to solicitation in those two conditions. Even if the contracting officer doesn't provide you that, you want to make sure that the clause is in there that it requires the application of those wage determinations, whether it's Service Contract Act or the Construction Davis-Bacon. But if the agency hasn't put those wage determinations in there, you need to ask them which wage determination. If nothing else, you want them to provide a wage determination so that everyone is using this same baseline for proposing labor hours. Because if they don't provide, it just says subject to, and you have one that's, last year's from this work last time, it could be out of date and you might be underbidding and hurting yourself. Sure, that's great for competitive, but when it comes time to actually incorporate to pay those minimum wages, you might not have proposed enough. You want to level the playing field as much as possible, and having the starting wage determination from the issuance of that solicitation, absolutely that should be a contracting obligation to provide those to you. You want to ask them. Don't just grab the newest. What if it's just revised the day that you grabbed it, and so you have something that's a little more expensive? You want to get everybody starting on the same wage determination, level that playing field. So that's one of those I could go on and about, but I will not because we'll run out of time. All right. Section K, the representation, certifications, other statement of respondents. Now, this is an older one. You can see that I pulled where it had additional, and it talks about the NAICS codes, and it had an additional documentation that you wanted to apply you to check to provide your applicability. Representation certification, section K, is specific to the solicitation package. It does not necessarily come part of your contract. It is a pre-qualifier to make sure that you're contract eligible. So here you can see the full clause for the annual reps and certifications, and I just grabbed the very part of it for purposes of it. So it says here, provision, the provision, this clause, system for award management included, paragraph D of this implies. So you're just saying, yes, everything's current. But there might be additional sub-agency where they want you to provide again, there's also, so this is example 1, there's also example 2, where this is agency for the type of business that they want you to certify what the legal structure of you. So the agencies can have further information that they require that they have generated. And you can tell because it doesn't have a standard clause number. Again, it's just got that solicitation numbering process. All right. The only difference that I don't have is certification for commercial buys, representation certification for commercial buy activity. That you'll, if it's that FAR Part 12, you will see that listed in full. And even though you've done your SAM registration, it is still those additional for that commercial activity that you do have to complete. All right. Section L is the instruction, condition, and notices to offer. This is, gosh, everything in solicitation is really important to read. But the criticality of this is the agency telling you how you are going to submit your proposal. This is them telling you, again, conditions, notices to offer. So the section may include foreign subclauses such as 52.2.15.1 instructions to offer, competitive acquisition. There's the 212 instruction for offers for commercial activity. So those are going to tell you, in that case, if you don't have a form to fill out, such as the 33 or the 1449 I showed you at the beginning, it says, okay, here, read the clause in full. Here's the information that you need to provide to have a complete quote. The name, the billing, your phone number, your address, your payment term requirements, etc. There's 10 items right at the start of that. And it may be in there by reference, but you need to know that information. It might provide site visit information, pre-bid conference, instructions on how to submit your proposal bid package. See this little icon, this is the contracting officer tapping the document saying, read your contract, read those instructions for submitting your proposal. Can the proposal be emailed? Can it be faxed? There are still times where you have to submit hard copies and electronic copies are not accepted. If they get an electronic copy, great, but if you get that hard copy to them, you haven't been responsive. You didn't do the way you were entitled. How many copies are to be provided? Is the price and technical in separate envelopes or in separate files if it's to be emailed? Is security an issue if the proposal needs to be delivered? If there's a process where they want you to hand deliver and there's a security, they're going to give you that information. Is there directions and limitations for technical proposals, such as you only can provide 5 pages and you have to use the time, the font New York Times and the size 12, that is so the agencies can guarantee that they can read it, that you're not going to try to cheat the 5-page limitation by using a 9-point font so you can get more information. And so that's not uncommon to tell you, you only get so many pages and here's the font we want you to use and here's the size to keep that valuation field as level as possible. If they give you a page count for technical proposal, does that include additional documents that they also ask? Like if it's a 20-page minimum, does that include, is it only your technical or does that include your past performance sheets? Does it, you know, the forms itself, all of that? Pay attention to that. Because quite simply, if you do not follow the instructions as written in the solicitation, your package can go right into that circular file, you know, the metal one next to the desk. It can be rejected because it was non-responsive, and the agency is not obligated to review non-responsive solicitations. So you want to follow the instructions so you're not eliminated before they even begin to look at your price or your technical component. Are the requirements for product specification, engineering documents? Do you have to submit design or data or drawings? Are management or QA proposals required? What is required? The proposal format? How is past performance to be handled? Do they have questionnaires that you complete, or do you write it up and provide names and they investigate? Pay attention to that. instructions, conditions, notices for offers, section L. Critically important because you do not want to be deemed non-responsive. Section M, evaluation and factors for award. So on a side note, just to recap, so yes, we're still talking about this UCF, that uniform contract format, that if it has these sections identified by parts and letters. But every solicitation package, every bid package should have a section L, should have instructions for offers, and it absolutely should have a section M, the evaluation factors award. Every competitive action, they have to tell you how are they going to make their award determination. And that's what this is, evaluation factors for award. The examples can vary tremendously from agency to agency, from contracting office to contracting office, from even that contract specialist. But there is always a how are they going to make the determination? What are those award factors? How are they going to do it? Is it a low price technically acceptable? Is it a best value give take, that trade-off? How are they determining it? And if it's a best value, what are those evaluation factors going to be? How are they rated? What is their level of importance? So like here, this evaluation criteria will evaluate the competing officers on the basis of the following 4 factors listed in order of descending importance: technical, cost, past performance, and small business participation. And not only should they have that, but they're going to have to tell you, is it awarded on a numerical 1 through 5? Is it a color coded? Is it a pass fail? It either meets it or it doesn't. Even as something as simple of buying those snowshoes that I mentioned, very simplified commercial buy, anything that you and I could walk into REI and actually purchase, that commercial buy activity, they still have to have a pass fail on that technical component. What they would have is that evaluations of salient characteristics. If I gave you a list of salient characteristics and your offer didn't meet that, well, your technical failed. But how are they making that determination? So again, how are they evaluating it? What are the factors? And how are they rating each of those factors? That is an absolute in absolutely every single solicitation activity that you are looking at. You need to know how is the government determining that potential awardee, and they need to define it. If they don't define it, then they're opening themselves up for that potential of protest, of those award protests. Because the goal of the protesting an award is saying, hey, agency, you didn't follow your own evaluation methodology in determining who the apparent awardee is. And here's our notification of protest of your decision making. So that has to be defined so that you know how they're making that decision and know if the agency is meeting and following those determination, following that process that they've outlined. Okay, time for a break. I'm down to a half an hour. The next section, I get into quite a bit more material. So we're gonna just let you guys vote. Do we want 5 minutes or do we want to power through the last half an hour? So just to give you a heads up, I can tell who's paying attention or not by looking at my little attendee chart here. So if somebody needs a 5 minute, please raise a hand. Yeah, Michelle, keep going. Thank you. All right. Well, there we go. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Let's keep going. All right, components of a solicitation. Now I'm going to kind of power through this because I want to get into our reviewing and looking at examples. So need statements. We've already kind of talked about this a lot, but this is going to give you that definition. Scope of work, typically used when task is well known and can be described in specific terms. It's prescriptive in nature, providing an explicit statement of work direction following for the contract. It defines performance timelines. Then when we get into the performance work statements or objectives, performance-based acquisition that describes the required result in clear, specific, objective terms with measurable outcomes. And see note here, FAR Part 2, that was our definitions. So here's the agency guidance on what do they mean when they say performance work statement. PWS says what needs to be done, but does not say how the work is to be completed. Again, prescriptive, objective. Establishes high-level outcomes desirable and defines measurable levels of performance. Great article here on the difference between the two and for writing them. So even if you're looking at subcontracting opportunity or looking at it from an agency perspective of when they're writing it, great document by NCMA. Compliance requirements. So a compliance requirement is listed in multiple places throughout the solicitation package. They prefer to performance and the actual contract administration. So again, performance might be key personnel requirements, approval of your lead personnel, the document submittal, if there's things that you have to submit on a quarterly basis, if it's those service documents, what do they look like? What's the schedule? What do they want in that? Again, this is tied to that performance. So your compliance is going to tell you what you need to be to state in compliance under the performance. Under the contract administration, pretty straightforward. SAM, your certified payroll for construction, subcontractor labor hour reporting, again, those yearly reporting documents for multi-year contracts, security requirements, government furnished property, payroll processes, whether it's wide area workflow, IPP, all of that contract administration that kind of keeps going outside of the actual direct performance, those indirect components, but are still critical for meeting the requirements of those contracts. Rules and regulations, we kind of talked a lot about these. Again, the FAR and supplemental agency FAR that defines the legal structure, clauses, provisions. Again, I've already mentioned, provides protection to both the government and the contractor. It provides guidance in response to, implement optional line items, how to resolve disputes, how to modify a contract, how to, termination for convenience or default. It incorporates legal protections for employees and other social agenda laws such as wage determinations and Department of Labor requirements, drug-free waste workplace, OSHA requirements. So again, this is the agency ensuring that there is the benefit for the employees as well. So rules, regulations. Instructions to bidders, can't say that enough. Pay attention to how it says. We've really gone over that. I'm going to move forward. Evaluation factors, I think I kind of really hit that home. One of the things that you want to pay attention to when you're looking at those evaluation factors, because again, it comes down to risk, that low price technically acceptable versus a trade-off, that negotiated best value, where price is important, but the technical approach might be the most important. So looking at that, it's also going to tell you if it says those factors, if there's 2 or 4 factors and their order of importance and technicals listed, then really your technical narrative is going to be that determination factor, and your price is like supporting of that technical. Can you do what you said in that within that technical? Okay. Evaluation procedure, again, we talked about that. How are they going to do it? Weighted average, pass fail, color coding. But pay attention to those factors. So again, that evaluation process is really important because it's really going to kind of clue you in how to weight your proposal. If you only have 5 sheets, where are you going to put those number of pages to ensure that you're really meeting those evaluation factors? If cost price is absolute and there's a variation of price, then that technical better support why your price might be higher, but why it might be worth it in that technical. Okay. Let me keep going because I'm really trying to keep an eye out on the time. Still have a lot to talk about. Award, we've kind of talked about that type of contract, the firm fixed price versus cost reimbursement. The agency has the right to award a single award or multiple awardees. The various types of contracts from purchase order contract, a basic ordering agreement, a requirements contract, IDIQs, that indefinite delivery, and then there's different versions, job orders, simplified, the SABRE, see that, military, multiple award, task order, those MATOCs, so different types of contract. Okay, I just threw this in here for kicks and giggles. You guys remember when back in the day of Fed Biz Ops, when I first started doing this workshop, the formatting in Fed Biz Ops was great for me to give you examples of, hey, look, they listed here. This kind of refers back to these different components for the solicitation and really saying, hey, are all those parts in that uniform format that they say they're going to provide, is that information in for your combined synopsis? See that contract form there, type. Anyway, I just had it because I'm nostalgic and remember when. That's my remember when face. All right, but let's actually get into this. See if I can spend about 10 minutes on this and then kind of go into our closing discussion. But time, I might not make it through all of the examples. So when we're looking at this combined synopsis solicitation, you can see it's changed a lot from the old Fed Biz Ops days into the SAM realm of the long scrolling. And so again, we still have that same information, the classification, the agency, the solicitation ID, our due dates, and we start getting into that description. So what I want to do is pull that, and I actually have my documents to break down into go into this, so that when we're looking at that uniform commercial format, good, I have everything open. Okay, so if you remember, we talked about those letters, the A through, part 1, part 2, part 3, and A being the form. So here on the solicitation itself, we have that information. So again, this information, here's our synopsis here. It's pretty straightforward. Our activity type that's right here, combined synopsis solicitation. Of course, we have the agency office, the ID number. But when we're looking at what information should be in this combined synopsis, based on our understanding of how a solicitation package is put together on that formal level, is the information that we need here. Well, here's our section J, all of the attachments. Roll back real quick so I can pull that up. Here we go. So again, just a quick reminder. So we have here part J, list of attachments. These are the sections that are really, really critical. The instructions for offers, evaluation factors, that need statement, those kind of areas we're talking about. Is this included? Is this a complete solicitation? Do we have all the information that we need to put together a good bid? Well, here's what we have for attachments. So what I've done, click on the right thing, is I kind of went through these documents and I highlighted the different components. So here, right, because we could see this, they use the form 1449, and I use this as the example, this particular one, but here we have the schedule. So our section B, it's even labeled B. So even though this isn't a formal solicitation, it's an informal, we have that request for quote. Oh, this one is, I'm sorry, this example is from the road construction. So yes, this was a formal, but here we can see the section B, our evaluation factors. And we can see, again, the pricing, for schedule of items that's going to break down our prices. Absolutely, that's information is here. Okay, there we go. This is the document I want for the jet. Sorry about that, guys. It'd help if I start with the right documentation. Okay, let me get up here to the top. Okay, so this is the one I kind of highlighted because yes, the combined synopsis, this is for Ketchikan, this is from the solicitation that I actually had in SAM on the screen. And here is this first download. Here's the documentation. And I've kind of marked it up because again, we want to look at this critically. Is the information provided? Okay, so combined synopsis, we got a request for quote, it's informal, which means we're not obligated until we begin performance, or we notify that, yes, we accept this, we'll start now. It's a firm fixed price contract. We talked about that from a risk What does that mean? What are you looking at? Here's our section C, that description or that statement of work. Description requirement shall provide labor, supervision, etc. to provide the boat package as described in the salient characteristics. So we have a separate statement document. We're not performing so much as we're providing something, so it has to define the salient characteristics, which is here. No, I'm jumping off topic. All right. Here's our delivery. That's at Schedule D. Where is it going to? Period of performance. Again, administrative. Instructions for offers. This right here, this is it. This is our entire section L of how are we to do this. And if you look at this FAR clause in full, the first 10 items, it tells you exactly what to include in your proposal. Because there wasn't necessarily a form provided that you sign, like you had that standard form 33 that we looked at. Okay, so the selection right here, instructions, conditions, other statements of offer. Selection, award, purpose will be utilized, simplified acquisition procedures as delineate FAR Part 13. So here's the guidance under which we are doing this proposal. Evaluation for quotes and offers. And it kind of rolls down. So it kind of follows this whole through. Sorry, we use Foxit Pro. It's a little harder to kind of mark up, but I just kind of wanted to say, here's what you do. Here's our process. Here's our communication. This is how are we submitting that instructions? We're doing it electronically via email. Here's our due date. Here is our evaluation. So this is kind of intermixed a little bit with that L&M. Offers submitted, here's our factors. Technical capability, we're looking at salient characteristics, delivery schedule, and proof that the contractor can work on that brand of motor being provided. Past performance, so they are doing this as a trade-off, a best value, because they're listing factors. It's not a low price technically acceptable, which has that, yes, it meets the salient characteristics, now price ends all. They're looking at other formers as well because, again, there's a service component. All right, time. All right, so again, we can kind of see here, those evaluation for award will award a firm fixed price resulting responsible, conforming to the most advantageous, that best value concept. Here's our factors. The technical, here's the sub-factors. They go into it, a written notice, acceptance of offer will follow. They continue the most advantageous selection conducted in accordance, and they're going to tell you how are they doing it. How is it being rated? That information is being provided within the solicitation. Again, factor 2, past performance. How are you delivering past performance? Anytime past performance is a requirement, how are you giving them? Are they giving you a form? If there is a form, is it completed by your references? Are those references supposed to send those forms directly to the contracting officer? Are they to give them back to you and you have to include them in your packet? Is there a minimum number? Again, all of that under that instruction for offers on that past performance. So again, you can see they have ratings for that, and then definition of price. Here's our clauses, contract clauses. Again, you can see the little checkbox of what's applicable. I know I'm scrolling really fast, so if anybody has any delay, it makes it kind of, they have their FAR and AGAR, because again, we have the agency and sub-agency incorporated by reference. This is our section I, the contract clauses, etc. So we can kind of go through here, and even though it isn't labeled section I, section L, section M, those critical components are still in the solicitation document. And if we're familiar with this concept of how this data should be provided in a formal setting, we can then critically evaluate the document of, are we getting the information that we need? So again, bid due date, contract administrator, here's the points of contact. Here's your list of attachments, section J. It's also here in this document, plus it was listed on the SAM website. They do have a price sheet that was attached to this. And here it is. And by chance, it's an Excel document. And here's your directions in the price sheet. Fill out the highlighted cells. Here's how they want this bid. Here's the dates. So this was provided just by chance in Excel spreadsheet. So again, we can take this knowledge that we gained from this process and look at that documentation. All right, well, I'm down short on time. Oops, let me switch this up again. All right, from current slide. So these are other examples that we can take a look at, but I'm fortunately not going to have enough time to really go into them. But these are other things that if you're curious when you get the slides, you can go. These are all active solicitations posted on SAM right now. These are the links for the solicitation itself, but you can see here's the information. This has the attachments, the scope of work. This particular snow removal, did it have the wage determination? It had a very specific service. It talked about wage determination being applicable, but was there one attached? The full synopsis, minimal attachments. This was a great example of everything that we needed to know was in the synopsis. And yeah, it just had a single attachment. That's kind of that point of that combined synopsis, is it's supposed to be relatively complete within the synopsis. Attachments may be optional. Here's another one. This Corps of Engineer, where it talks about addressing amendments. Again, these are examples of combined synopsis solicitation. The solicitation itself, we had a couple of different that I just want to pull out, is this particular activity, and you can see the difference. Solicitation, and it actually has it in the classification. Actually, it's in the information that I didn't grab the screenshot, but in the attachments, it actually had a link to the bid opening. I threw this in here because this was a great example of sealed bidding is still used. This was a construction activity. We can see by the NAICS code, the 237, and this had sealed bidding. It was a solicitation, quite a few attachments, but at the bottom it also had the link. So if you were an interested party, you could attend the bid opening. Here, this was just an example of a solicitation from FAA, and I thought this was great because right in the description, it actually tells you, review all attachments, and note, being posted in accordance with FAA's acquisition management policy, all interested vendors are advised that FAA will not pay. And also it talks about that it follows the AMS and not FAR. So even though FAA is posting in contract opportunities, they are letting you know that it is subject to. So it's right there in the synopsis that some of the documentation that you might be looking for, they still have the uniform commercial format concept under the AMS guidance. It's just the numbers are a little different. And this documentation I just wanted to throw out here for you to call attention to, because again, solicitation, dredging, you could see the classification, construction, it had the full documentation. And then under the links, so we have attachments, and under the links, they are giving you the information of actually you are submitting the proposal through the PI system, the wide area workflow. So pay attention to when you're looking at this information, even as you are downloading the attachments, it's talking about how are you going to go through and post that actual solicitation. And yes, the Corps has gone through doing it through the PI module. All right, down to the last few minutes, so let me talk about proposal elements. So we talked about the solicitation package. Now we're talking about what you need to pull together to have your proposal to respond to that actual solicitation. So I've kind of broken it down into these four main components. We're going to have our administrative, that acknowledgement of amendments, the signing of the form. How do you put your package together? You're going to have a cover letter. You're going to have your SAM registration because you have to have an active SAM registration by the bid due date to be a responsive bidder. Remember, non-responsive bidders, your proposal can be chucked before it's even open. Your past performance information. So there's these administrative components that are defined in the solicitation in various places throughout. It could be under that section G, it could be under your instructions to bidders, it could be even under the evaluation factors for past performance. But these are components that you are pulling together that are going to be written up together, administrative, right? We have your completed price sheet. Use the price format provided in the solicitation. And now we have our technical. Now, technical is kind of a funny thing because if it's a slightly more complex, then yeah, technical is very clear. They talk about technical narrative, talks about, especially if you have that performance work statement or statement of objectives. And when we look at the evaluation factors, if technical is going to be the priority evaluation factor, then absolutely we want to really look at that. But even if something as simple as submitting that motor that we just kind of looked at for the combined synopsis solicitation to the Forest Service, the technical component wasn't necessarily the written how we're going to do it, but it's the confirming the salient characteristics in that price sheet and putting in that time of delivery, because well, technically that's the administrative, and then also the proof that the company providing that motor is certified to work on that motor. So even in supply purchases where they're just buying the stuff, the components, the technical may not be this big long written how are we going to do it, but there's still information that you want to convey to them, and whether it's written on the price sheet, such as delivery deadlines, anticipated delivery, those other factors that they asked about, kind of pseudo administrative technical, but you still want to communicate. And of course, we have those additional components as identified in the solicitation, whether they're looking for resumes, MSDS, manufacturer safety data sheets. There we go. Pull that one out of the recesses of the dusty part of my brain, where there's different things that they want you to provide, samples, examples, literature on the components. There's multiple differences that you could provide and you're just hitting salient characteristics, then they might want the manufacturing sheets to prove that those things meet those additional components. All right, building a bid matrix. And I think I'll still be in my 70s and will still can't hear the word matrix without thinking of the movie Matrix. So that's me humoring myself with that photo. But what we want to focus on is that task and responsibility about developing a proposal process checklist. And there's really no right or wrong. It's really about being consistent within your company that you are making sure that you are putting your best proposals forward. And the proposal, a bid matrix, bid requirement matrix is really identifying, writing down the key areas that need to be addressed. So when you're reading that solicitation, even if you have 2 yellow legal pads next to you, and one is your requirements and the other is the to-do. So if it says past performance evaluation, well, that's a requirement. Your to-do list is quite simply, you're going to have to gather data to complete the forms. Or ask the question, where is the form? If they just say they want past performance but don't tell you how they want it, you might need to, your to-do might be ask the contracting officer the question of, is there a questionnaire? But it's really about reading that, identifying the stuff that is expected to be provided that you'll be doing, and how are you going to do it, and even addressing who is going to have the responsibility to get that done so that data can be compiled into your proposal. Okay, write down key areas that need to be addressed, list each area that will have a financial impact to the project, assign responsibility for providing those cost pricing breakdowns, which items require explanation in the technical, define lead times, set deadlines. So this isn't for the proposal performance, but for, stumbling over myself. This isn't for actual performance project management timeline. This is for your proposal deadlines. If the deadline is in 3 weeks, maybe you have a week just to pull your team together and have a team meeting, and then you're going to have your initial done by week 2, so midweek 2, so that you can review it And then week 3 is to do your final red line audits, edits, and getting that finalized proposal. But this is your process and part of setting that matrix. Note areas of weaknesses within your company that will you need to hire additional staff or bring in subcontractors? What can you not include in-house that you might need to address as part of that technical proposal? Again, what are your requirements? How are you going to respond? Who has that responsibility? If you need a quote or price factor, who do you have to reach out to get that? Who's going to be responsible for pulling that information together? Phew, I've got about 2 minutes. No, 5 minutes. My clock on my desktop is a little fast. So let's talk about in summary. Don't be daunted by reading the solicitation. Yes, when we initially download that, it is a stack of papers to go through and read. And I truly do mean read everything and go through those clauses. Understand even the ones that are boilerplate, like, employees to be wearing seatbelts, those standard equal opportunity employment. Understand those because there are components in there that you have legal obligation to perform. Okay, don't be daunted by reading the solicitation. Once you understand the components that should be in a solicitation, you can move forward with confidence. Are the information components that we need in that solicitation package? Read the entire solicitation, not just the scope or that performance work statement. I can't tell you how many businesses I've talked to, they're like, that's all they've read. They just look at, oh yeah, I've just pulled the scope and then I price it and then I submit it. It's like, well, what about all of these other factors that define and have requirements and things for you to think about? If you didn't include that because you didn't read the entirety of the solicitation, you may be in that non-responsive and it gets chucked into the bucket, non-responsive. They're not even going to open it. Don't just rely on one section. If you have a proposal team, make sure they're getting the entirety of the documentation. If you are divvying components out that you want your cost estimation manager just to start reading, looking at the specs and pulling the prices together, then make sure you are providing them the additional information that is going to impact that. So if there's a time delay and he's just looking at, lowest cost factor, not realizing that there's criticality of time, that he might have to go with a more expensive component because it's more readily available. It has a shorter lead time. There's the entirety of the information, not just the scope. Follow the solicitation instructions. We talk a lot with contracting officers. I have conversations all the time. It's like, hey, I want to build training. Where are you seeing that industry just isn't paying attention, and where are the most mistakes being made in bid packages? What are your guys' stress levels? And it always comes back to the vendors aren't reading, the contractors aren't reading the entire of the solicitation. They're spitting out questions that were answered, 2 pages down. You can tell they're just flipping out questions, emailing questions, or calling and asking questions before they've read the entire solicitation. Yeah, capture those questions, make sure you write them all down. When you have a question, when you're reading something, write it down, and because it helps you make sure that it's answered further in the solicitation, or if it is something that you do, reach out to the contracting officer for clarification. Know the cost of running your business. Understand what it will cost you to perform the contract. Where are those risk factors? Where is that risk scale sliding? Look at the type of contract. Is it a firm fixed price? Is it some sort of cost reimbursement? Where are your risks and how are you quoting those price in regards to that risk? What are your contingency pricing that you're building in? What's your break-even point? Are you really making a profit? Ask questions. Note I have it in bold. Verify the requirements. Don't make assumptions if the solicitation language has conflicts or is ambiguous. It is a reliance upon industry that the agency is actually asking for things that can be done in the manner that they're hoping that it can be done. Industry processes change. If they are saying it has to be this particular brand or this particular process, and there's newer, better options, ask the questions. Why are they asking for this particular? as opposed to salient characteristic. Ask questions, get those questions in writing to the contracting officer. Pay attention if there is an open period for questions. And if they say question deadline such and such date, the agency may not answer those questions after the fact. Ask yourself what is missing. That's kind of the point of sitting through the solicitation for the last 2 hours, or this webinar for the last 2 hours, so that we understand how a solicitation is put together, the various components, that deciphering it, what are those things that we need to know, what information is missing, what do you still need, ask yourself, what information would you want to know if it was your money being spent and not money that you're receiving? Flip that on its axis, and if it was coming out of your pocket, what would you want to define for the people that are providing you quotes? And develop a process to respond to solicitations. Be consistent. Develop a bid metrics process. It's really about the process more than the form itself to ensure that you don't miss any details. And there's a lot of great articles and resources on the internet that you could find for helping you develop that. And last but not least, that was a tremendous amount of information. And if you have questions with any of this, well, here's the team here in the Alaska Apex that we can assist you. All right, guys, I am at noon. It is lunchtime. I imagine people are getting restless, ready to go. You've been a fantastic audience sitting here for the last 2 hours. A tremendous amount of information that I've at you in a very rapid process. If you have questions after the fact, again, you're always welcome to reply to your webinar invitation. It has my email address that comes back to me. Let me know if you have questions, if you have a solicitation that you would like assistance with to better understand, to help you feel confident in asking the questions you want to ask. If you feel like something's missing, but again, you're not certain, you're welcome to reach out to any of our staff here, the contract specialist team, and let us schedule an appointment. Give us a heads up if you're looking at a bid due date. It helps us with our planning. But again, let us know how we can help you. Well, everyone, thank you again. I didn't really have any questions or leave time for questions. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and officially close today's webinar